Welcome to the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, and today with us we have our CEO, Nate Pearson, and then we also have Dr. Kyle Pfaffenbach, and we're going to talk about fructose, all the nuance between like these carb ratios, and if it's even important, we're going to cover that. Also protein. We have, like I said, Dr. Kyle Pfaffenbach with us, who his athlete just got bronze in the 1500 in the greatest race I've ever seen. Oh, silver. That's right. He got silver.
Yeah.
Yard Nagoose got bronze. That's right.
Yeah. Nagoose
like the greatest race I've ever seen. That was incredible. The 1500. If anybody didn't see it, it's incredible. You have to go watch it. Especially if you can watch like the full recording, because then you get the hype between Ingebrigtsen and Kerr beforehand. But Kyle, this weekend or last weekend, we just well, actually, when this is recorded, it'll be 2 weeks ago when this is published, I should say. Okay. So we did Leadville 100. Tons of our listeners did that.
Yes.
I built out these time sheets for people based on like all the time goals, and they could download them, print them out, and put them on their top tube. Tons of people did that. By the way, we got so many messages from all of you that did Leadville and used TrainerRoad in one capacity or another to train for it. It's amazing. Fantastic job to all of you. It's really cool stuff. And within that, we got a lot of people saying like, I need a column for my nutrition plan, and I need you to make one so then all my pit crew knows what I'm doing. So I actually want to take some time here to talk about my nutrition plan, because as people will be listening to this, I will have already raced Steamboat Gravel. I don't know why I'm racing a gravel race. I don't really like gravel, but it's a big race, and it's one that I've wanted to do.
Why don't you like gravel?
It's always, anytime I'm riding gravel, I go, man, I wish I was on a really nice smooth road. Or I'm going, man, I wish I was on a mountain bike on a really fun trail.
But you're in more nature than like a road bike. That's what I like about it.
Yeah,
you're like
it is
right
pretty.
in there. And that's a you thing.
I know.
But not as pretty as mountain biking.
I'd rather be on exactly right. It's more pretty on mountain biking typically. I don't know. It's just, an in between. But anyways, the whole thing changed up. They went from having this like famously smooth course. Now it's a rough course this year. I don't even have the bike for that. I had a road bike and I was going to put 35s on it because it's usually really smooth. Now I have to drive and I have to stop by Keegan's house and steal one of his spare bikes that I'm going to use. It's a whole thing. So, but I want to talk nutrition really quick.
Yes.
Kyle, I've been trying out Never Second, their stuff recently.
Yeah.
They have their hallmarks are 2-to-1 ratio. They don't use the 1 to 0.8 ratio that you'll see with some products. They use a
2-to-1 ratio of what, John?
Glucose, well, in this case, maltodextrin to fructose is what they have in their drink mix. I've also been trying their gels, and same thing there, 2-to-1. Mm-hmm. Everything works in like these 60-gram increments, like where you get 60 grams of carbs.
Yep.
And then you also get 30 grams of sodium. And you get that in all their products. In other words, it makes it pretty easy to be able to go up to like 120 grams per hour and something else. And I shouldn't say 30 grams of sodium. I should say 300 grams of sodium or 600 grams of sodium. That's what it is. So it's 30 grams of carbs in their gels, and then 600 grams of sodium is what they, or milligrams of sodium.
Milligrams.
Not grams. I'm not turning into salt. I'm messing this whole thing up. Anyways, I've been using their stuff. I've famously made my own drink mix and done that for a long time. Yeah. We get industry discounts here in TrainerRoad, and just like anybody else in the industry. And the cost really isn't that far off once I've started adding in sodium citrate into my homemade drink mix, which I did, which by the way, tastes way less salty. And I feel like I'm getting enough sodium, but the cost now is not far off of the product that I could just buy.
Because sodium citrate's expensive, right?
It is. It's how much I think it's like 6x the cost of salt.
That's right.
So it really drives it up really fast. And it also doesn't taste that salty. It's cool. They already have that in this stuff. They make it at scale. It's easier to buy it that way, I feel like. But anyways, I'm questioning myself here on this whole 2-to-1 ratio. In my personal experimentation, I have had less gut distress issues with 2-to-1 glucose to fructose versus this 1 to 0.8 ratio that some scientific evidence is pointing to, saying some, not all, but some is pointing to it, saying that it's optimal to be 1 to 0.8, not 2-to-1. And I have this question. Is it dependent on the dose? Like, is 1 to 0.8 only better if you're taking in a lot of carbs per hour, like 120 and more? And I don't know if you even really know that answer. Perhaps you just have like an opinion based on the experience that you have.
So there's a couple things here. One is that you have to try these. When you look at these studies, when you're looking at this through the lens of a scientist and you're looking at these studies, the first thing you'll notice is they're like 9 people, N equals 8 or 9 people, and we're getting to the point now where we're trying to capture some like really specific like stuff. You know, when it was, you know, the glory days of this research is like water with electrolytes, carbohydrate, liquid carbohydrate solution, and there's like a 40% like increase in time to exhaustion at 70% or those types of things. When you're trying to now tease out these like really small percentage differences or yeah, they may be like statistically significant, but one, it's really, you require some sort of washout period, some sort of rest period, and multiple trials because you want to do it within each individual. So if you have 8 people and 3 conditions, you want to test the same 8 people in all 3 conditions. You don't want 8 different people in the 3 conditions. So that's the first thing. Well, typically you're going to have like a several day washout period, if not a week, because you want them to be recovered from exhaustive exercise, which is typically the end point. And things can change, like sleep can be disrupted. You can just be less like there are factors that can influence these results, and you want to try and control for those things as much as possible. Now, obviously, we have like a peer review process. We have really smart people doing these things. We have people that control for the food that they eat prior, you know, so typically 24 to 48 hours before in a good study, everything will be like exactly the same for all the different conditions. And we have ways to do sleep tracking and all these different things. And you can even look at readiness and things like that. But still, it's super cumbersome. It's hard to get right. And even when you do get it right, you're still looking at like really small sample sizes, which then brings us to the question of like when they found this, increased effectiveness with the 0.8, the relationship 1 to 0.8. So it's 1 molecule of glucose to 0.8 molecules of fructose versus 2 molecules of glucose to 1 molecule of fructose, or that ratio. Molecule isn't the right term, but you get what I'm saying.
Unit, if you will.
Unit. And so, and the reality is like, I could see where one or the other may cause more or less GI stress. I could also see why almost like a 50-50 ratio of glucose to fructose. That's an interesting proposition. And the reason is because fructose is handled by the liver very differently than glucose at a molecular level. And the idea of, we've known for a long time that when you add fructose to a mixture of carbohydrates, it changes it can change the glycemic response. It can change some of the absorption. It can change, but it also changes like molecular signaling that's occurring in the liver because of the way that fructose is handled differently than glucose. And so there's like these interesting, it's clear that there has to be some sort of combination of fructose and glucose. And this ratio story is getting kind of cute. And the 50-50 can be, or the 0.8, the 1 to 0.8 ratio does seem to upset more people's stomachs than the 2 to 1. That's probably not worth whatever small like gain you're getting in terms of when you see that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
and
it does.
And so I think you can try both of them, because I wouldn't be surprised if there's people that do better on the 0.8 ratio, what they call the 0.8 ratio. The whole thing gets confusing because they call this the 0.8 recipe basically, and they call the other one the 2 to 1. And can we just like stick it to, yeah. So it's really a 1 to 0.8 and a 2 to 1. And we're always talking about glucose first and fructose second. And when I come down to this sort of thing, and like if someone came and said, like, I really want one of these or the other, I just wouldn't push back on them. Now we're getting to the application standpoint, like the art of it. I just wouldn't push back on them. And I'd say we need to find a product that we know works with your gut, that we know we can deliver the grams of carbohydrate. And if someone says, well, I want to make my own, then the rule is like you need to tinker with your glucose and fructose, but it has to have some fructose in it. It can't just have glucose. Obviously it can't be all fructose either.
Yeah. On that note, do you think that a lot of this is driven because there's a lot of research that shows limits of glucose, ability to uptake glucose, right? And process glucose. It was commonly referenced, I think, around 60 grams an hour, basically in terms of what a person can take in.
40 to 60 has been...
Yeah. And part of me wonders if in this case, they were kind of like they're bumping up against that limit, whether that's an individual limit or a broad limit, whatever it is, but they're bumping against that limit. So then they're like, well, let's toss more fructose in there. And because then we're just getting more on board. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but
yeah. So the reason why I'm pausing and thinking about this for a couple seconds is because there's multiple things going on with that. So anytime someone says one number and that's what a person needs, you have to realize that that's just like a starting point based on averages across a bunch of different studies, right? So when they come up with this number, it'd be the same as saying that like somebody your body size, Jonathan, can onboard 600 grams of glycogen. And that's a very, very loose neighborhood based on a bunch of different studies of people that are your body size, that are well-trained, that are like have this increased capacity for taking on glycogen and those sorts of things. But the reality is that like for a lot of people, if you say a bigger person, if you said get 4 meals of high carbs prior to a big workout, and a smaller person, you say get 3 meals. And by high carb, you're talking about 120 to 150 grams of carbohydrate. So basically 2.5 to 3 cups of rice per meal. You're probably going to get them to where they're topped up because you're just saying like, I just need to get enough carbohydrate in the system prior to this session to get your glycogen levels up. And it's the same sort of thing with this idea of, I've seen 60 grams, I've seen 40 to 60, I've seen no more than 80, but the ratio of sugar does make a big difference here. And it's more than just a traffic jam at the glucose receptor. That is part of it. We have a certain number of glucose receptors in our intestinal lining, and the transit of glucose as it's going past, you kind of end up with a traffic jam. And when you put multiple different types of sugars into the system, you get more opportunities to get sugar into the portal system. The other thing that it changes, which I don't know what the impact of this is, and the one more recent report, when you look at it, when it's talking about 0.8, basically what they said was we're seeing different dynamics if you do fructose in different ratios, maltodextrin, for example, versus just simple glucose. So you use maltodextrin instead of individual glucose molecules. And there's a lot of cool studies that are being done where they're trying to look at these things and you're really looking at like marginal differences because it's all sugar at the end of the day. But there's a couple clear things that come out of it. One, with gut training, we know we can increase our capacity to take in carbohydrates and we can increase our capacity to handle it. And part of handling it is getting more of it through our small intestine, so less of it's in our large intestine, which is where you have the GI distress. The second thing is that, and I haven't seen this, and I'm kind of waiting for this because I think this would be really cool, but it'd be super hard to study, is look at the expression of glucose receptors with gut carbohydrate training. So look at the molecular mechanisms, right? So if we look at the ring that actually allows glucose through, and there's passive diffusion and facilitated diffusion. There's multiple different ways and there's multiple different receptors. And looking at the changes of expression of those, I think would be really, there's probably some animal studies that have been like force-fed sugar. And then I think what would be interesting to see is that in a person that, like, for example, eats a lot of sugar, I'm getting off the rails here, but for a person that eats a lot of sugar and doesn't exercise, I could see it downregulating as an attempt to try and control glycemia to some degree and protect the individual, right? I don't have any data on this. I'm giving somebody some really good ideas to go and study. So there's gonna be a lot going on. And then there's also going to be individual differences in receptor expression, your gut microbiota. There's a slime that kind of covers the internal surface of your gut that breaks down with intense exercise and heat, which can start to cause GI distress and these types of things. So the health of that gut layer is going to impact, and then what you've been training with. So for you, going into Steamboat and using this as like a test case, that race is a week away, right?
Yeah.
Like,
a week away.
And don't change. That's the biggest thing right now. It's like,
keeps it fun.
Go ahead, Nate. Yeah.
I have a few comments, but first off, I like the idea of testing something like this that's been okay in training, making a tweak, because racing is always different than training. And if he really doesn't care, but it's closer to like a big event, I would do it in the race. Like if you did DNF'd, you didn't really care, because you get up at a certain time, you do all the pre-race. It's really, the high intensity is different. I like that idea of, I've done a lot of testing on nutrition on that. And second,
if it was national championships, it would probably be different.
Would not do
Nate?
it.
Yeah.
No new wheels on National Champs Day.
Ask me how I know.
That's an old podcast thing. Second, John, was your question of why 2-to-1 you have less stomach stress versus 45 to 55?
Yeah, me back.
Or
So the answer there would be multiple reasons why. That like it's going to be receptor expression, it's going to be liver metabolism, it's going to be what you're getting exposed to and training with. And I think the most important thing is not the ratio, it's which is playing nice with your gut individually.
I have a more layman's version. It has less fructose in it.
Yeah.
And that's why. I mean, that's, you know what I mean? So maybe John should go more towards less fructose and see how he does in training. Cause what's your per hour?
Typically, so for this race, this is a whole separate issue, but antibiotics, I'm allergic to penicillin. I've been on antibiotics recently for a really bad sinus infection. They're like broader spectrum. And whenever I've taken them, they completely like destroy my gut. It's like my stomach doesn't know how to process food again. Totally. So I would typically for a race like this be at 120. Over all of Cape Epic, I think I averaged 115 when I looked at it retrospectively over the whole thing. So I'm typically around 120. For this race, I'm hoping for 90. On Saturday, I tested at 90 and it worked okay, not great. And then I'm going to do a race tomorrow and I'm going to try again at that. But 90 is what I'm looking at.
And you were 2-to-1.
2-to-1, 90.
Yeah. So on 2-to-1, that's 30 grams of fructose per hour. Is it fructose or fructose? I've always heard people say both.
I say fructose.
Okay, I'm going to say fructose too.
Yeah.
And then 90 times 0.45 is, and it's 40 grams at the other. Because if you do the ratios, 2-to-1 is 66%, 33%, and the 1-to-8 is 55-45, about. So there's really not that big of it. It was 10 different grams per hour. And how many hours are you racing for?
Well, this is going to be probably a 5.5 hour race.
So 50 and a half more grams of fructose over 5 hours. And I think that's what gets confusing in the brain is the 0.8-to-1 and the 2-to-1. The 2-to-1 seems like way more, different. But it's really 45% versus 33%. So in John's case, an extra 10 grams per hour. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, John, too, is there something else in there that's messing with or two, a little bit of brain thinks one thing, and so it actually, it reinforces, or a mixture between the two. You get a little bit of stomach pressure. You're like, oh, I knew it. Here it is.
Yeah,
I have definitely had that.
Yeah, because for me, so like right now, the Never Second stuff sits super well. It's at that 2-to-1 ratio. And I've been making my own drink mix now for like almost 4 years. And in that whole process, I've experimented. I've even done 1-to-1 because I'm mixing this stuff like, once every few weeks, I batch mix it all into their own little Ziploc bags. That way it just I don't have to think before I ride. I just dump the bag into the bottle and we're good. Mm-hmm. And so I've tried everything there. And and it's not a 1-to-1 relationship, as in every time I take in 1 to 0.8, I get stomach distress. It's not like that. But if I look back at the times when I've had stomach distress, it seems more common when I am taking 1 to 0.8 than it does, because this is every day in training, unless it's like a super easy ride or something else. But this is every day in training. So it's kind of a lot of data points to pull from. It just seems more common there. But it's interesting because I've seen like certain brands say that like 2 to 1 is passe. And instead, now it's 1 to 0.8, and that's the new thing. And I know that there is some research that has indicated that that may be better. But Nate, this is a really good point to like step back and actually look at the total amounts, because it puts it in perspective.
I have other ideas too, is maybe the type of maltodextrin. It could be corn, rice, potato, wheat, like different, because that could be the one that is better for you, or you're better at a higher maltodextrin and this specific brand.
This is the interesting thing is I've always had issues with maltodextrin, like almost always. And as a result, like for my custom drink mix, I just get glucose. And
that's a big
just pure,
difference.
it's way more expensive. Way more expensive. If you buy maltodextrin or dextrose or any of those other things, it's like a fifth of the price if you go with one of those versus pure glucose. And it's cool too. If you've ever had a hard time with your drink mix mixing, try getting glucose and fructose, and then it just instantly mixes. Like you don't have to do a single thing. Whereas if you get dextrose or you get maltodextrin, it's a pain to mix, and you have to use hot water or you have to use some sort of agitation. And in this case, it's just instant, like it's dissolved. And as I understand, it's because of the refinement of one thing or another, and glucose is just very refined.
But so the never second's maltodextrin though. And it's
which is puzzling me, is that it's not causing gut distress. It doesn't dissolve as easily as my custom stuff, but it doesn't, for example, compared to Marten, it does dissolve easier than Marten.
Yeah. So I was wondering then if something in that process that they use is different, and that is the key differentiator for you. Like
a higher quality maltodextrin or something, maybe more refined. I don't know.
Maybe a different version, corn, rice, or something like that. Maybe they use rice instead of corn.
Yeah. The ratio could make a difference. I'm not following you, Nate, on the overall difference, because your 2 to 1 does seem quite a bit different than basically 1 to 1, 0.8, like 1 to 0.8.
So 2 to 1, So 2 to 1, if I took the 90 grams per hour, 2 to 1, that's 33% of those would be from, fructose.
Yeah.
And that's what, 30. And then on the 1 to 0.8, that would be, what would I say, 40 grams per hour, but it's a 45.
0.45.
45.
Yeah.
So the difference per hour is just 10 grams of fructose
10 grams per hour
for his race.
Okay, got it.
And I'm wondering if it was twice as much, but is that really enough? Percentage wise, I guess it is a kind of a big increase, 30 to 40.
Right.
Certainly on the glucose side, it's a big increase, right? That you're doing with the 2 to 1 versus just the 1. So, yeah.
I'm just wondering if it's more on the maltodextrin side, because I've also had that where some maltodextrin does not mix.
Do you remember that?
If it doesn't mix there, how's it going to mix in your I don't know. This is like layman stuff, but if it's really doesn't mix in the bottle and we can't get it to dissolve,
no, it's different.
Isn't going to? I would think that I know, but I would think that it would sit in my stomach a little differently too than.
Well, no, because it goes through your stomach. It's so acidic. The environment in your stomach is
destroys
so acidic. And then when you get to, it's a completely different environment. It's warm.
So fill it with lemon juice.
And then you get it
with hydrofluoric acid.
And then you get it into your small intestine. When you look at the studies about the different ratios, the percentages of people that experience nausea and gastrointestinal distress on 1 to 0.8, it's not across the board. A bunch of people do fine with it, and a bunch of people, and these things are really interesting because for a long time, nutritionists would say things like a calorie is a calorie or a carb is a carb. It's all sugar. Just get it in your gullet. And what we're seeing are these nuance and these relationships that actually play nice with a broader part of the population or broader part of the individuals doing this type of, and a lot of this is the 2 to 1 ratio and the maltodextrin and the gut training and being able to push more. A lot of that comes from like Oscar Ukendrup, and I know he helped with Never Seconds development and some of their scientific stuff going, and he's been involved with a lot of these things, and his work is really interesting. When these carbohydrate studies came out, it was sort of like, all right, done and dusted. Like you just take in a bunch of carbohydrates and you're going to do a lot better. And he started asking these really interesting questions about gut training and what do we do? What if we mix these different ratios? And what if we look at these? And there's also was a lot of really good work that came out of GSSI, which is was the science branch of Gatorade, especially in the early days. A bunch of smart people there. And there's still quite a few really smart people there doing good work on some of this stuff. And all of that's really nerdy and interesting. And I think the hope that it gives somebody with a sensitive stomach, it gives them something new to try to solve their stomach issues. And in my experience, this has been more of find a product that you like, not a ratio that you like. And when we know that product works, stick with that product, because then we know that we can train your gut up and push it to 120, 100, maybe even 140. And if it's working, if it's never second, if it's scratch, if it's whatever, you find that product that works and you go from there. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking myself out of that and saying this would be a stone to unturn. It's not the first stone I would unturn personally if I was trying to solve someone's gut issue. So I would think about taste. I would think about gut health. I would think about the intensity and the environmental conditions that they're working under. I would look at things like what their probiotic regimen is. I would sort of look at those types of things. And then you can sort of experiment with different things over time and find out what's going to be best for that event under these circumstances. Because even when never
really
second,
hard though, Kyle. It's easier for me to just say 2 to 1.
Yeah,
works.
okay. I got you. But it does take don't. So here's the thing: if you're tracking things the way people are tracking things, if they're on TrainerRoad, they should be putting in information about their food on those rides, and you can trust yourself. If you felt really good at hour 6 of an 8-hour ride and you just ate a cheese croissant, that's real data. Don't ignore that, for example.
Yeah,
and
it's tough though.
What's
your power output?
Yeah.
What was the weather like? What'd you have before? We've heard a lot of people tell us, I rode 5 hours on water and I felt great. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be then, you should just keep riding on water. No. There's probably something more optimal than a sandwich too.
It is.
So that's the anecdotal in your brain. That's why we want the science.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And when you get down to 2, maybe when you get down to the nuance of 2 to 1.8, your point, it seems like, Kyle, is that there's bigger fish to fry. Perhaps there's bigger things to focus on rather than such a small nuance of the glucose to fructose.
Yeah, but when you start thinking about it in terms of marginal gains, I still can't get over that. In Unbound 2 years ago, it came down to a half a bike length. It's you better have things dialed at that point. It's a really long race. And the other thing I would say is especially with stage racing and especially with ultra stage racing, you have to have something that is going to play nice with your stomach. And you have to have confidence in that, because getting through those things with a good stomach is such a big deal, because especially when you have to eat afterwards, because you have another thing, you have another big stage coming up the next day. And, if this unlocks it for some people, maybe it will. I just don't think it's going to. It wouldn't be the first place to start.
Nate, Kyle's like a good economist or scientist, where he says, on the other hand, a lot. He can see both sides of the coin at all times, right? Yeah.
Well, I think something that people could do more of is in their training, intense training, even an hour, go for that 90 or 120 that you want to hit and see if you can do it and train yourself, because you probably don't need to go 120 for an hour. You can adjust the rest of your, edit another meal later to have a little bit less carbs. But I had really great success doing that for all my intense rides and all my long rides outside, going for what I would do on a Leadville 9-hour race. Where it's like life or death, right? Or if you get that max amount.
Yeah.
And I was doing before I had my last concussion, I think I was doing some for 160 to 200 grams per hour on a bottle, 2 hours inside. 200 was too much, but I found the limit. I wonder too if I would have just kept. I don't think anyone's doing this.
If you would have
adapted. I just would have kept doing it, because I was burning over 1,000 calories per hour.
Right.
So even that I'd be behind. And if I would have done that over and over and over again for 6 months, I'd had some diarrhea, but then after that,
I mean,
maybe
there
it would just
has
be
to
pure
be like at some
fuel.
point, there's going to be a biological ceiling. There's only so much like molecular real estate to
but
have
doesn't
those
it make
receptors
sense?
and those types of things. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no science to back this up, but this is a classic thing I say. Yeah. You would think of like how humans adapt. And if you keep putting this in your body, especially with nutrition, there is some limit, but what is the limit? Because I've never seen something where people go like they jam it for like 6 months at a, they really go. Everyone tells me, I made it to this and then stopped.
This is a talent though, where like, because somebody else made it to a place doesn't mean you're also capable of getting there. So this is a big point I use in my class a lot. I say, no matter what I ate, how I lifted, I can't be LeBron. That is beyond my human limit.
Be Steph Curry.
And so when you're saying, can a human do this? Like, it wouldn't surprise me if a human could do that, or, take on over 200 grams of carbohydrate. And if they were also gifted in a whole bunch of other ways in terms of endurance and those sorts of things. There's also like, ultimate performance is the amalgamation of all a person's talent plus their environment, which includes training, their mental approach, all these little different things like that. So if you're chasing this thing that you think is going to make you a completely different person and you think it's 0.8 compared to 2.1, that's probably not the case. There's probably other ways that you can do that, but there may be a few super high responders and they realize like, if I do the 0.8, I can do 180, 140, 160 per hour. I never get sick. I never get sick of it. I mean, the taste is totally different, especially when you're using pure glucose and pure fructose. Like, that is a sweet solution. When you get the maltodextrin with a little bit less fructose, it's quite a bit less sweet. It's much more palatable for longer periods of time. You can actually try and train your gut up to get to those higher levels, 100, 120. Some of the stuff about 140 and 160, man, I think it's cool, but you also have to realize, like, you have to get that into your, like, it has to go through your stomach, go through your gut, go through your portal circulation, clear first pass liver uptake, get to the bloodstream, get to the muscle that's working, get taken up by the muscle that's working, phosphorylated, put into glycolysis, put it in the electron transport chain, and ultimately be, drive ATP. Plus you're trying to like, pump your heart and keep your vasculature working and your kidneys working and your brain working. And so I don't know where that limit is. And but I know it's not the same for everybody.
I think my point's more of like maybe 10, 15 years ago, and John was part in this too, we would have said 60 is the limit. And John would have said, I do more than 60, my stomach's messed up.
Yep.
Now we tell John 120s.
Verbatim.
Now we tell John 120 is the limit, 90. He works up to it. He can't do it at first. He gets to 120. He trains up to it, goes 120 is the limit. I'm not going any farther.
Yeah.
I can now, you told him he can go on 120 when he's okay. No one's ever said 130, 140. So John just stopped there. And I wonder how many other people, when you talk about there's difference between a 5'2", 100-pound person versus a 6'6", 220-pound person.
Yeah.
Is there a difference in the amount that they can absorb with everything you just said?
There's a study.
I think there is.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a study coming out on that specific exact topic.
Who funded that study?
That's gotta.
I wonder.
That's gotta be.
It was us, right?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, cool.
That's that's the whole point. That's the question. I think it's
So that's what I'm wondering is
question.
But how many people are out there that are maybe the outliers, and outliers could just be body size, intestine length, that have not we know I did too. I restricted myself to 60 a long time ago because I heard that was the limit. And 120 is the limit, but maybe these are all with 145-pound people who are college kids who this is the first time they've done it. They're not like really training their gut for 6 months, years. If we looked at it with power-based, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go on rant. If we looked at it with power and we said, hey, you know what? We trained these individuals for 6 weeks. They got up to 200 watts. They were never trained before. They've never done this. And that's the limit. Where we know then if we train people for many years, they can do incremental increases year over year. And I wonder with nutrition, I know there's a limit, but I wonder where there's a maximum.
How plastic it is.
Yes. Can it go if I really work on it, can I go to 130? Can I go to 131? Can I go 132? Like, where is the limit on that? If it's probably individual.
That's the point.
And that's why I'm saying like a 120. Yeah. But I mean, for individual, I would love to see a study where there's some outlier that's like 240. Yeah. And then everyone's brains would be like, oh my goodness, I could try all these other things.
Yeah. The point you made, I think last time we talked about this, Kyle, was that we don't really know what the benefits would be, assuming that there's some sort of bottleneck being hit with, if you're, because famously, like Matteo Jorgensen said on our podcast, he takes in 160 grams per hour. We have triathletes mentioning the fact that they're taking in 180 to 200, right? And you did a great job of responsibly stating, I don't know what is going on there in that specific individual, if they are indeed processing or taking up more of that. At the very least, their bloodstream is probably pretty darn happy, full of full of glucose, right? Or full of sugar, effectively.
I mean, it's like the ability to utilize that. This is like, you have to have the ability to utilize it. You can't just have it in the system and then it all gets utilized. This is like one of the things that can occur. Like, people can have a lot of mitochondria, but if they can't get oxygen to it, that's an issue, right? And so So in terms of Nate's point, I think the most applicable thing you could pull out of that, I'm just going to like put it that way, and I see this a lot, is that people do not fuel on the bike the way they plan to race, and they don't train that way, and they don't eat. They don't. You say, we get up early, you do this different thing, you maybe are eating different stuff. The stress is there. The only thing we can't recreate there is like the full race day anxiety thing, right? But everything else you can recreate. You can recreate like what it's like to sit on the starting line for 10 or 15 minutes, what it's like to roll out and then walk over to the starting line. Like, you can be really detail oriented in how you do those things. Now, are most people going to take the time to do that, especially if they're like balancing a bunch of other things in their life and they just like bike racing? Probably not, but you could do those sorts of things. The biggest bang for your buck, however, is to think about your food off the bike as separate than your food on the bike, and think about your food on the bike, especially on your hard days, your high quality days. Act like you're in a race that day. You can't eat 60, 40, 60, a gel here and there willy-nilly, and then have some sort of super sophisticated race plan on race day and expect that to work. It won't work. And so the point is like, you treat those, typically people have 2 to 3 hard days per week. You treat those the same way you would treat a race. Then you can train that stomach. I don't know if the question is as important, what is my limit eventually, as how much can I take in right now and perform? And over time, how can I creep that up? Not necessarily with like, I want to get to 120 or I want to get to 100, but I'm just going to keep pushing this a little bit more and a little bit more until it starts pushing back. And I think that's kind of how you find your own individual limit. I mean, I don't think this isn't like spilling any secrets or anything like that. This is because Keegan talks about it openly. We just pushed it and it just kept getting better and better. And in a lot of ways with this new kind of, like when he left XCO and he went to this new kind of chapter of his career, a lot of what he was doing was in that camp. I'm going to push volume. I'm going to push hours. I'm going to push vertical. I'm going to push I'm going to push all these different things, and let's just see where it is.
More is more.
And it turns out that like I mean, especially for his capacity for sweetness, I've never met anyone like that for his capacity for sweetness. Like, he just doesn't have a limit on how many gels you can take. And then other people are very clear, like, I can't eat more than 2 gels per hour. So we got to find something different. Or I can't drink a bottle. I can't just drink nothing but gels and bottles. So we have to find something else.
I think my point on that too is like, when it pushes back, keep pushing. Like, it's kind of like saying, when I was working hard and I got really hard. You know what I mean? So I stopped. Like, I think you should have some uncomfortable days.
Yes.
and then to go through it. That
That's
totally helped with
interesting.
me.
The feedback that you get, there's two ways to think about this. It's if your body is adaptable, the pushback to that comment would be like, if I wanted to bench 150 pounds, I wouldn't start with 180. I would start with 100 and work up to 150. And I would do 150, and that would be my limit at that point. But I could keep progressing. And at some point, I'll reach a ceiling on a bench press and I can't bench press anymore. And the idea of supercompensation, which is the foundation of this, and this is a mistake that I think a lot of cyclists make sometimes, and runners do it too. They run too hard too often because they think that if they run at this pace, then running at a slower pace will feel easier. And in some ways that does occur. But in other really important ways, what they're not doing is running just below what they can sustain, because that gives them the adaptation to sustain that and push that up. So you see people with like really high VO2 maxes and pretty low lactate thresholds, for example, because they're always training super threshold and they're never training below threshold and getting right below threshold and getting that adaptation that pushes that curve out. And I would say that I'd be more of the camp, the non-Nate camp in this example, where you just automatically go out and do 120 until 120 feels normal. Or just like when you get to, if you have one bad ride at 120, you don't just go back to 60. I would say you give that some time, but and there could be some discomfort, but you will get used to things if you're going in a stepwise fashion that's appropriate. Because you're looking for super compensation, not reactive to like some massive stress. Does that make sense?
Let me, I don't think I explained myself right. I'm not saying that everyone should just jam 120 right away and like throw up and keep going. What I'm saying is like, if 60 right now is good for you, try one extra gel the first hour and maybe one extra gel the third hour, see what happens. And if you're starting to get stomach pain, stay at that couple rides. Then once you're good, add an extra gel at 2 and 4. And then once that's good, extra gel at 1 and 3, and keep doing that until you really get to that limit where over like a very long time, you can't do it. And two, sometimes I'll get a little bit upset. It's like a little bit of pain, but I can still add to it and I was still able to go higher. Yeah. Like there's this level of like upset stomach I can have when I race or when I train. That's like a 2 or 3 out of 10.
Acceptable. Yeah.
It's acceptable. It's just like my stomach's not super happy like when I'm racing all the time. John, is it ever like super happy for you? It's always a little bit.
No, I completely agree with that. When my training is most consistent, I'm improving, but it's not just because I'm able to train consistently, physically pushing my pedals. It's because when I'm training more consistently, the way that I do it is exactly like Nate said. I'm driving up my consumption rate in terms of what I am consuming in terms of carbs per hour. When I'm not consistent with my training, it's hard for me to get to 120. Like I can't just jump in at it after I've stopped for a few weeks. I can't just jump back in. But instead I have to, if I'm training consistently enough, if I'm nailing 4 workouts per week consistently and I'm not missing, that gives me 4 opportunities to push that slightly higher. You know what I mean? And when you start doing that, that's what makes it so that you can sustain it. So I think there's this, it takes time and it's highly individually variable, but that's what also makes me faster is it's because I'm able to take in more, I'm able to fuel more work rather than just being stuck at 60, more opportunities to take in more and to be able to do so systematically and in a stepwise fashion, like you said, Kyle. It makes it so that I can it supports better performance, it seems like later on.
To go back to Nate's example, I like this discussion because I guess I would say I'm just more conservative in this way, where if I was working with an athlete and I said, take an extra gel an hour, and then they said it was like, okay, I would want it every hour, but I would say, okay, let's go to half. Let's find that point where it isn't and go up from there. And I think you can push through that a little bit, but I think going over that limit ends up being detrimental in other ways more often.
I for what it's worth, I take pretty darn small jumps. So we're talking if I have 4 weeks of training, over 4 weeks of training, I might get to the point where at the end of that block, I'm taking in, and when you mix your own drink mix, you can make this really easy, by the way, which is another perk of this. But by the end of that block, that's when I've gone from 90 to 100. at the end of 4 weeks.
Right.
And then another 4 weeks, I'll go 100 to 110 or maybe even higher.
Oh, man.
So it works.
Like,
but no, I'm talking a 10 gram delta from 1 week to the next, or from 1 week, or from 1 month to the next, 10 grams. It's pretty small. Like, it's not like a huge change.
Yeah. So, when you think about how many hours are in that 4 hours, you're going per hour. And you're also talking about carbohydrate amounts that, again, you typically go like, 60, 80 if you're lucky. And now
it burns, man. The furnace is hot, and in that case, I'm burning like 800 to 1,000 calories an hour, right? Like, if it's like proper training and I'm fit.
Yeah, 100%.
And so I'm only getting maybe 400 calories from my carbs that I'm getting right there. Yeah. Granted, I'm not going to be burning just pure carbs the whole time, but if it's high intensity, I am. But yeah, I think that the stepwise fashion part is key. I feel like we've covered glucose and fructose, and I want to move into protein with the time that we have left here, which we have just about 20 minutes left. This question comes from Alex. He says, "Hey, Jonathan, thanks so much for this podcast. I think I've listened to every single episode over the years, and it has helped me live a much healthier life, not just in terms of cycling, training, and fitness, but also overall mental, emotional, and physical well-being. It's a really wonderful resource, and I'm just so grateful for you. 5 stars for sure." That's awesome. Thank you. This is really kind words, Alex. If you want to rate the podcast, by the way, that helps other people find it. You can do it on Spotify or whatever podcast app you're using to listen to. If you're watching this on YouTube, a good old thumbs up and a sub helps. It's a really wonderful resource, and forgive me. Moving on from that, next time, even though I'd like to read my positive feedback again, next time you have Kyle or Alex or Tim or one of the other nutritionists or dietitians on, can you ask them to speak a bit about the quality of different protein sources and what we should be looking for when assessing them? What makes one better than another? How much variety do we need? Is there a max percentage that should come from a single source or from supplements? This is interesting because I saw another person on the forum recently say the fact that, like, I've reached a point in my life where, like, groceries, I don't have a limit really for what I can spend on my groceries, and should I just eat fish all the time was what they were saying. So I could see where this question comes from. Additional context to use if helpful. You've talked about things like BCAAs as individual supplements in the past, but not really in terms of the quality of daily protein intake. I'm sure there are other considerations as well. Can you give us some guiding principles or things to look out for when choosing our sources of proteins, both from real food and supplements? And then the final bit of context. As a master's athlete with increased protein requirements, I find it difficult to get enough low-fat, convenient, portable, and affordable protein into my travel-heavy and unpredictable freelance working pattern. There's a lot to cover, so maybe just covering from a principles perspective, Kyle. How do we judge the different protein sources, and is there something that you recommend somebody favor over another?
Yeah. How, I guess the big question is, how basic do you want to start?
Let's go basic. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Explain it to me like I'm real young.
The way to think about this, the way I've had success in helping people think about this, is that obviously fat and glucose do more than just provide fuel, but we often think of them as our primary fuel sources. We can use protein as a fuel source under particular circumstances. Those circumstances are not something you want to be in as a high-performing athlete. This is starvation, famine, these types of situations when we have to mobilize protein as an energy source because we're out of everything else. Protein, the main role of a protein in an active person's life is to support their tissue. And everything in your body is made up of some sort of protein. Like insulin is a protein. Muscle is protein, obviously. Bone's protein, skin's protein. All these things are proteins. In humans, so in our proteins are different combinations of the same 20 amino acids. So we have, and the way that I describe this is like the letters, the alphabet versus words. So you have several 100,000 words in the English language. They're all made up from different combinations of the 26 letters in the alphabet. There's 20 amino acids. There's thousands of proteins in your body. They're all made up of different combinations of these amino acids. The reason why that concept needs to be like really clear and kind of comprehended, even though that's a very easy example and an analogy to understand, the reason why that needs to be in place for a person is because when you're understanding protein intake, you want to be thinking about it in terms of what amino acids does this protein have, in what amounts does this amino acid and those proteins have, and what amino acids, like which ones am I most likely to be kind of limiting or deficient in, or those sorts of things. There's this thing that they teach in nutrition books called the all or nothing principle, which is basically that you could have 19 out of the 20 amino acids in ample amounts. If one is missing or is lacking, you just don't go forward with protein synthesis. This is something that can really impact somebody's recovery, somebody's growth, because what we're doing is we're always having tissue turnover, right? We're always breaking down old tissue and old proteins. We're building up new ones, and we're responding to training stimulus. And so getting the proper amount of protein and getting high quality protein is really, really important. And to the caller's question, well, I'm just going to stop there and let that breathe for a second. Do you guys want to jump in on that, or have any like
no, it's brilliant
or anything like that?
I like it. It'd be like if you were saying they were all the same, it'd be like all words are the same.
Yeah, exactly. And they just
not all words are the same.
Precisely. Yeah. So what then you want to start thinking about is like these different classifications and ways to classify the quality of proteins. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this. One is basically a protein quality index, and that just uses egg as the standard. And this is one of the reasons why eggs have gotten a good reputation for being high quality protein. The issue is that eggs don't have a lot of protein. So, for example, I'll ask an athlete, a 180 pound, 200 pound athlete, you may not be getting enough protein. And they say, no, I eat 2 eggs every morning at breakfast and I get protein at every meal. And I say, well, you could need 130 grams of protein a day and you're getting 12 at breakfast because 1 egg has 6 grams of protein. So one thing is to just sort of like start to create this sort of mental idea of how much protein is in this and what is that amount. And so an egg then, where an egg is really good is it's very high quality protein. And the way that high quality protein is described is that it has all 20 amino acids in ample amounts. So it has a lot of everything and it has a really nice mixture of everything. Animal products are high quality proteins. They have a lot of amino acids. In most animal products have a lot of amino acids and they're in ample amounts. And so that's what you're thinking about when it comes to protein quality. There's also this other factor, which is how much of the protein in the food that you ate gets absorbed and actually gets into your bloodstream. And most amino acids follow the same path as carbohydrate through the digestive and absorptive system. So it's through your stomach, through your small intestine, through receptors in the small intestine, into the portal circulation, through the liver, and then out to the systemic circulation. So liver gets first crack at a lot of these nutrients and things like that. And then which of those amino acids in what amounts make it into the bloodstream, this is really important. This is why, so whey is really highly absorbed and it gets absorbed very quickly. And a lot of those, and it has all 20 amino acids in ample amounts. This is one of the reasons why whey protein is such a good protein supplement, because it just gets into the bloodstream. Those amino acids appear in the bloodstream very kind of quickly and efficiently. And this is why, like, if somebody asks you, well, why can't I just eat a turkey sandwich? Why do I have to take a protein drink? And I tell coaches this all the time especially high school and college coaches that are dealing with big groups of athletes that maybe things aren't dialed in particularly. And they say, well, I just tell them eat a turkey sandwich because you got your carbs there, you got your protein there. But the kinetics of that meal are completely different when you look at the studies comparing the absorption and the appearance of these amino acids. And that can make a difference in terms of stimulating protein synthesis and recovery processes and things like that. So that's the second thing. So there's this thing called the protein digestion and absorption accessibility score. It's like the PDCAAS scale. So, and that's a little bit different than just the protein quality scale, which is based off of just the amino acid content of the egg. Now it's taken into effect, well, how complicated is this food? How quickly does it get absorbed? How well does it get absorbed? And how many of those amino acids does it deliver? So you have that factor to kind of play into it when you're thinking about protein quality. And then the third thing or the next major thing to consider is the quality of the food where the high quality protein is. So, for example, red meat is a very high quality source of protein when you're talking about it in terms of amino acids. But there's some really crappy red meat that is bad for your health. And so think about really poor quality ground beef, these types of things. And it can be really high in saturated fat. It's full of different things from the farming practices and the butchering practices and the manufacturing practices and all these different types of things. So that meat could have quite a bit of protein in it that's high quality protein if all you cared about in your food were the individual amino acid makeup of it. But of course, that's not just what it is. And so, like, when they control for quality of diet, eating meat and animal products does not appear to be a huge issue. It's eating really highly processed, very poorly raised, poorly treated animal products that becomes more of an issue. The other thing is like the reader that said, I've gotten to the point where I have unlimited budget. Should I just eat fish every day? Well, yeah, fish has like, good omega-3 fats, got good oil. It's a very high source of protein, but you can't eat it every day in modern society because our waterways are super polluted. And when people eat fish too often, they start to accumulate mercury. And mercury is a very slow turning over heavy metal that you don't want to accumulate a lot of. And so there's like these different considerations, again, where like if we didn't have polluted waterways and we had an unlimited supply of fish, that, there's people that survive like that and have done so for a really long time. But it's not... And so you want to know where the food is coming from, what the quality of food is, and then you do want to consider what's the amount of amino acids in this and what is the quality score of those amino acids. And there's clear definitions of what those are, and you can find lists for the PDCAAS, for protein quality scores and different things like this. One of the things that you'll notice, like if you look at a collagen supplement, collagen is lacking in some critical amino acids and is not considered a complete protein. And if you look at the fine print on your collagen, it says this is not a protein supplement. This is not a meal replacement supplement. If you've been asked by your doctor to take a protein supplement, this is not it, because it's Now, what's interesting about collagen is it's really high in particular amino acid, particularly glycine, because glycine is every third amino acid in tendons and ligaments. So if you're supplementing with collagen, you're doing it for like a very specific reason. It's really to get that glycine. When you look at the profile of whey protein, and most supplement companies will put the profile on, and they'll show that it has ample amounts of leucine, valine, isovaline. Those are your branch chain amino acids. They're really important. But it has ample amounts of all the other proteins, especially when you compare it to something like an egg or red meat.
I'm looking at that scale right now. I shouldn't call it a score. It's a score. Protein digestibility corrected amino acid score.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking on Wikipedia, so I have no clue if this is accurate. But looking at that on here, it shows like a list of the different things. And 1 is the highest score. 0 is the lowest.
Exactly.
Decimal points range in between.
Yeah.
I'm seeing cow's milk, eggs, casein, coming from milk protein, soy protein, silkworm pupa, whey milk protein, mycoprotein, potato protein concentrate, chicken, beef, soy. Anyways, it all goes down there and it kind of gives you a whole ranking.
What
so
if you do have,
if you do have if you do have the space in your life to be able to break it down and decide how to break it down, then that seems like a pretty good guide for people. Is there something that you recommend?
So where this becomes the biggest issue is so there's a couple of just basic recommendations people can leave this conversation with. Number 1 is, are you vegetarian or do you eat meat or do you eat animal products? If you're vegetarian, things are a lot more complicated. I'm a vegetarian, but I eat eggs, or I'm a vegetarian, but I eat fish once in a while, or I guess that's a pescatarian. I'm a vegetarian, but I'll still eat whey, or I'm just full vegan and I don't eat any animal products at all. It just takes a lot more work to get that quality of protein in when you're in that circumstance. So it's not impossible, but you really do have to be on top of things. And the irony is that a lot of times there's just this like background thought that vegetarians are healthier than people that eat that are meat eater or omnivores, or that it's just a simpler way, it's a more like sustainable way. If you're an athlete and you're a vegetarian, you're probably going to be like significantly more heavily supplemented than somebody that eat meat on a regular basis or eats animal products on a regular basis, because you're not getting creatine, you're not getting carnosine, which is a precursor to beta-alanine. You're not getting like, there's a whole bunch of different things that are just not as available in plant sources of food. It's just a fact. And so that's the first big question. Am I eating animal products or am I not? If you're not, then you have to start thinking about, well, how am I going to build this nutrient profile that meets these very real protein demands, because I have to do this for the rest of my life, right? That's kind of the whole idea of it. And when you do that, then, and they've gotten a lot better. The supplements have gotten a lot better. Garden of Life is they don't pay me or anything like that. I just am aware of it, where they basically looked at the amino acid profile of whey, which is a really high quality complete protein that's quickly absorbed fastly. And they've made a plant-based protein where they've combined just like a whole bunch of different plant sources of protein to get that similar profile. Doesn't mean the bioavailability is the same as whey, but at least they're matching the amino acids, for example. So that's the first thing. If you're an omnivore, if you're eating meat or animal products, then the next question or the next piece of recommendation is spend your money on good meat. Find out where it's coming from, find out how it was treated, find out where, and that's both from a animal welfare standpoint, but it's also from a quality standpoint. And so you want to know that you're getting this meat from the farmer that knows this cow's name, and you're not too many processes and people.
It's like Portlandia.
Yeah, exactly. Like you go all the way back to the
Kyle,
chicken
I have
farm.
a question.
Got it.
Animal cruelty, understand
Sure.
for sure, and then like what they eat of grass versus corn fed.
Precisely.
What else does it impact in the actual nutrition of the animal? I'm all for the treating the animals humanely.
Okay.
But besides the grass
super
and corn,
good question. Super good question.
And antibiotics too.
So there's
other than that, what is there?
So there's a bunch of. So basically, what's interesting about the meat industry is you can buy organic meat that was grain fed, and so you kind of have to check multiple boxes. You have to: is it hormone free? Is it organic? Is it grass fed? And you have to check all these boxes, because if you grain feed a cow organic grain, you can call that meat organic. And what that does to the meat is it increases the amount of saturated fat in the fattiness of the meat, which is not ideal when you're consuming meat multiple times per week, for example. And so what happens is that cows do a much better job of turning carbohydrate into body fat, like actual body fat, than like say a human does. We don't like turning carbohydrates into fat is something we're capable of. It doesn't contribute very much to our overall adiposity at all. So basically what happens is the meat's just not as healthy for you because it's been treated with a bunch of antibiotics, which I know there's controversy about the right way to like treat animals with antibiotics and all these different types of things. I prefer, the conclusion that I've come to personally is I don't want to eat meat that's been treated with hormones or antibiotics. Grass-fed, the meat is more, it's more nutrient dense because it has less saturated fat, and there's less saturated fat.
There's higher omega-3s and higher CLA and
absolutely
grass-fed versus this is grain-fed.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think too, like, I'll just say what I know we ran out of time, but what I do and similar to this is I eat fish that are low mercury content, like tilapia, shrimp, and like wild-caught fish. Chicken breast, no bacon, no pepperoni, none of the like salami and all that sort of stuff. Those processed meats. And I basically stay away from red meat in general. And then when I do, I try to do like a little bit of grass fed, which is tough, or I just do it if like, you're getting hamburgers or something and you're out in and out, but
totally
reduce the amount of red meat. I don't think there's any study where red meat improves health. and then whey protein. So whey protein, fish, and chicken.
I think that's a great approach.
Is kind of my.
It's a it's a totally fine approach. I would say the argument for a little bit more red meat is that I think it's underestimated how nutrient rich it is in things outside of protein.
Like what?
Iron, vitamins, things like, cobalamin and vitamins, and then even things like taurine and creatine and other like components of muscle that are nutritious. And
I supplement.
Exactly.
Sorry, I supplement creatine, and I do black beans and spinach with vitamin C to get.
So I wouldn't say you should stop doing your approach and add more red meat. There are absolutely ways that you can do this without eating red meat, but you really have to be aware of those things that you just said. And a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of the things you just said. So I do think like chicken breast, eggs, even turkey is a great. You can also buy. So we buy the chickens from a farm around where we live. We buy the chicken, like they've been sacrificed, and we get the actual chicken though, and then we peel that, and that's what we put on sandwiches, not like processed cold cuts or those sorts of things. We'll do the same thing with turkey. So I do think that from a practical standpoint, you're taking a completely reasonable approach. I think going back to the original question, we've talked about getting the right grams per kilogram body weight with protein. And then you want to get really high quality sources of that. And it doesn't need to just be like all whey protein shakes. You can get your whey protein shakes for recovery. You can have some eggs. You can have some meat. If you're vegetarian, it becomes a little more complicated because you have to do complementary proteins. The dietary textbooks recommend you get 10% more total protein because of the lower bioavailability. Just becomes, and then you miss out on a lot of those micronutrients and vitamins and minerals and things that we talked about. So you just have to make sure you're really on top of the supplements.
The other thing that like my go-to right now is non-fat Greek yogurt with like walnuts, goji berries, chia seeds, and ground flaxseed.
Sure.
That's almost like, and then blueberries, sorry. And that's like a daily 40, 50 gram of protein meal. And I love it. And it's not that expensive. And I get like the whole list of superfoods and fiber on top of it. And I recommend.
Yeah. I think that's like an excellent meal on the go. I know technically in my mind that, and again, this is how I would think about this. In my mind, I would not count that as 40 grams of protein because I really want the majority of and I know this doesn't, you can argue it both ways. I really want the majority of the protein that like an athlete is getting coming from like really high quality, complete
Is Greek
sources.
yogurt not complete?
It is, but it's so like a cup of Greek yogurt is an amazing source of protein, but it's about 20 grams. And then
I'm eating so much.
Oh,
I'm eating enough. Like,
so if you eat 2 cups, of Greek
half
yogurt,
a tub at a time. Like
Yeah,
you've never hung out.
Okay.
Me and Keegan can go bowl for bowl. Like
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's not like a little cup of something. It's definitely measured out.
If you have a cup of Greek yogurt, that is 20 grams of protein. I thought you were counting there is protein in granola. There's protein in
I don't count any of that. I'm only counting I don't even count it from my like walnuts and stuff. I just count it from the other stuff.
That's the key.
The other one that's kind of crazy.
When you put in your rice or you put in your whole grain bread or you put in and all of a sudden it's like 9 grams of protein from these like non-protein sources. Functionally, I don't really count that either. Like we're talking about protein sources.
In America, 2 more tips. I'm sorry, we got to go.
Yeah.
Boar's head lunch meat.
Sure.
That stuff is amazing. It's a little more expensive. You can find it. Secondly, in my Stanley, I do iced coffee and it's big enough. I use the Fairlife protein milk, the non-fat. It's like 50% more protein than regular milk protein.
It's a cool example.
And my whole thing, I believe it's 70 grams of protein. that I drink out of this, of milk, which seems like it would destroy you, but there's lactose free also. And I put like enough iced coffee to get me through, and I just drink that. And so I do that with my, it's cool. I've been in a muscle building phase for a little while, and
huge question
I'm like
mark
35 pounds heavier.
Huge
lower
question,
body fat. Go ahead.
Huge question mark on enough iced coffee to get me through on exactly how much that would be.
This much. No, I use this. I don't know. It's tough. I got to figure out the caffeine.
Now, is it 0.8 or is it 2 to 1 or is it 1 to 1?
Yeah. This is awesome. Kyle, thank you for all the practical advice. You have one more thing to add. Go ahead.
I was going to say, when Boar's Head is not around, look for Applegate. That's what we feed our kids, because our kids anyways, Applegate is that's a very practical brand. And that's great because they'll have the things that the kids will eat, like chicken nuggets and chicken strips and those types of things. High quality, no antibiotics, no good company. So, and again, they don't, I have no affiliation with them, but.
Great practical example. Big takeaways that I'm getting from this is if you want to get very specific about it, you can go look at that score. Again, what the name of that score is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. You can look at the different foods
0,
that you have.
Right?
Wait, say that again.
I believe collagen's muscle building score is 0.
Yeah, I think it is somewhere on here.
It would have some.
To your point, it's not as high as one would think.
Yes, it would have some qualities to it, but it's not going to.
Yeah. So you
not
look
for
at that.
muscle building though.
And then
exactly, for other stuff.
To maximize the impact of the protein that you're getting, count it from the high quality sources. Count the protein from there. If you really get into it, you can count protein from the rice that you're eating too. I mean, you can count protein probably from everything down to your lettuce. There's protein in all these things, but in reality, you want to be counting it from the higher quality sources, and you can use that scale to help guide you.
But I want to say this though: if you're vegetarian or vegan, you can do this. You just need to understand which foods to mix in order to get them complete. And to do it, because if we don't say that,
yes,
vegetarians and vegans will destroy us. But if you have a flexible diet and can do this, that's the way I think about it. It makes it simple too, because you don't have to. It's really hard to think about this food and the mix it. You can Google it, but it's easier to look at the.
Yeah. So the technical term for that is complementary protein. So if you say rice and beans is a classic example. Peanut butter and toast. These are things where beans don't have an amino acid that rice has. Rice doesn't have an amino acid that beans have. You put them together, you get complementary proteins. And there's some cool stuff about, do they actually have to be consumed together? Can you consume them throughout the day separately? And because they're all going into this thing called the free amino acid pool, which is kind of this. But the whole point with that is that it's just, you do have to, there is an extra set of there's extra onus on sort of being careful about that, especially if you're an athlete and you're a vegetarian athlete. It's more complicated.
Takes a lot for sure. Well, thanks, Kyle. Thanks for joining us
my
again.
Pleasure. Super fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing all this information. If you found it useful, give this video a thumbs up. Share it with your friends too. If you're a cyclist, chances are they are probably also confused by all the nuance of 2 to 1 and 1 to 0.8. And hopefully we drove some clarity and gave you some good principles to follow with that, and then also with protein. So if you enjoyed it, let them share it with them. Go check out TrainerRoad. Nate, we'll talk about this on future episodes. We have really exciting stuff that our team is jamming on that Nate and I cannot wait to talk about with all of you. So stay tuned. It's going to be super exciting, and sign up for TrainerRoad now. Best bang for your buck to make yourself faster. And if you've thought about it and you've been kind of on the fence, do it now, because then you'll be prepped for next season. It'll be great. Talk to you all later. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.